skeletal remains uncovered from the ritual platform in the Peruvian highlands at the site now known as Pacapampa show that people buried there suffered violent injuries, likely as part of ceremonial rituals, according to an archaeological study published earlier this month. The scientists behind the discovery wrote that it looks like individuals suffered ceremonial blows to the head that fractured their skulls, perhaps willingly, though those blows likely didn't kill them. Given the archaeological context, the remains were recovered from sites of ceremonial practices, as well as the equal distribution of trauma among both sexes and a lack of defensive architecture. It is plausible that rituals, rather than organized warfare or raids, caused most of the exhibited trauma, the authors wrote. The question that remains is why. One of the ways that present-day archaeologists try to understand ancient cultures is by looking for signs of violence. Knowing how people were injured or killed reveals conflict with other societies as well as religious and societal behavior. Nagaoka et al. PLOS 1 2017 researchers have been able to learn much about the early civilizations that populated the Andes by studying the violence that occurred there. In the remains of people from certain ancient Peruvian civilizations, like the Chinchorro who lived near the coast from 700–600 BCE, signs of violence on skeletal remains seem to be the result of conflict. Conflict-related trauma tends to be much more common in men than women. It also tends to be clustered on the left side of the head, and individuals may have fractured forearms associated with attempts to block weapons. There are signs of human sacrifice dating back as far as 5000 BCE on the coasts of Peru. In the central Andes, archaeologists knew that construction of public architecture indicating signs of organized societies began as far back as 3000 BCE. But there has been less evidence of violence found to help shed light on behavior. These discoveries at Pacapampa provide new data. Nagaoka et al. PLOS 1 2017 excavations at Pacapampa began in 1939 and the researchers behind this study have been examining the site for their present research since 2005. From 2005 to 2015, they discovered the remains of 104 people, 66 adults and 38 children, which date back to time periods known as the middle 1,200,800 BCE and late 800,500 BCE formative periods. 7 of the adult individuals shown in the photo collage above were all recovered from the same ceremonial platform of the site and showed signs of trauma to the head, limbs, and elbows. Most of the injuries found in these individuals were to the skull. These sorts of injuries suggest intention and repeated blows to have been the cause, rather than accidents, the authors wrote. There were signs of healing as well, which implies that individuals didn't necessarily die from these injuries, even if they were severe. Researchers don't think conflict is what caused the skull trauma here. Pacapampa is a ceremonial and not a defensive site, and these bodies weren't found in living quarters, which would be expected if the individuals had been killed in raids. Plus, there weren't defensive wounds on these bodies. The limb injuries were likely associated with falls throughout life. Nagaoka et al. PLOS 1 2017 because these particular individuals were buried in places connected to religious rituals, the researchers wrote that ceremonial activity is a likely explanation for their trauma. As for the reason why, the researchers can only speculate. Social tension related to food resource shortages led to social stratification and ritual violence in some early civilizations in the central Andes, the authors wrote. But it's not clear that resource shortages affected Pacapampa at the times these individuals lived. Skeletal remains didn't show signs of nutritional shortages. There are some indications that elite individuals in society identified with predatory animals with fierce characteristics, especially big cats like jaguars. The controlled practice of violence may have been a way for elites to show their dominance. Over time, the injuries that these individuals suffered became more severe, potentially reflecting stratification between social classes. Ritual violence did include human sacrifice in later eras, so researchers wrote that the ritual violence here may reflect the emergence of a hierarchical society. In the early stages, ritual violence associated with the dominance of elites resulted in injury that grew more intense as time went on and that hierarchy was more clearly defined, eventually reaching the point where such rituals ended in death. This article was originally published by Business Insider. More from Business Insider. The mobile carrier landscape: how at Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint are overcoming slow user growth amid a fierce price war. Rosenberg: everyone obsessing over who becomes the next Fed chair is doing it wrong. The Internet of Things 2017 report: how the IoT is improving lives to transform the world. Fintech could be bigger than ATMs, PayPal, and Bitcoin combined. The social media demographics report: differences in age, gender, and income at the top platforms: FB, TWTR, LNKD, Google, Snap.